Hello, everybody, and welcome back not welcome back. This is our first one, our first series recap. And of course, it's the team that got eliminated first in the playoffs. We've got a couple other teams that have been eliminated since, but joined in by Brian Finlayson. Brian, first of all, how's it going? Unfortunately, not covering the Winnipeg Jets anymore because not for the playoffs at least. We got a ton more that we're going to talk about, but how's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. Having to sort of digest the fact that, Jets hockey's done for a bit, but they're certainly giving me a lot to talk about in their their postseason media conference. So, definitely that'll give some legs to some content coming up here.
For sure. Well, let's get right into that post-mortem of this series. Jets get eliminated in 5 games. It's not it was a very disappointing series, I think, overall. We thought it was probably going to be a bit more competitive, but there's a lot of things going. So let's get into that. What went wrong in this series? Like I said, I can't remember what I predicted this series to go, what we were doing, but basically, what went wrong for the Jets against the Golden Knights here?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the fact that they were absolutely just ravaged with injuries. You're going to be in a deficit when you have, guys like Nikolai Ehlers out to start the series. He didn't get into his first game until that game 5. They didn't have Cole Perfetti for the whole series. He was out for the back half of the season. But then you lose Josh Morrissey and Mark Scheifele, and you're running on fumes at that point, and you need a lot of guys to step up. And ultimately, and as much as the injuries can be blamed, you're also finding that there was a lot of inconsistency in who would actually step up and put the effort in. And I think that was really the biggest problem with not being able to extend the series, where you get certain players that you're going to get the consistent effort out of all the time, but I feel like there was a lot of that disappearing act for some guys where they'd score and then you wouldn't see them for another game or two and stuff like that. And that was I think a big issue. I think another one is Connor Hellebuyck looked human,
Mm.
and the Jets just don't seem to be able to. They can't really figure out what to do when they have to not even carry their goaltender, just play in front of a goalie who looks human. Both Hellebuyck and Bressois were not stellar in the series. And Hellebuyck, he made a lot of big saves. Wasn't the Hellebuyck we've seen of past, but eventually you can't just rely on just your goalie to drag you through. So we saw this early in the year where Hellebuyck had a bit of a downswing and the team didn't know how to handle it. Same thing happened in the playoffs, and I feel like that the injuries and the effort level from the guys who had to stand up, combined with the fact that they needed to make up for Hellebuyck looking like a regular goalie, think that really was what doomed them.
Yeah, you touched on two of the bigger things. We talked about in the preview show that Hellebuyck would have to be good for this series, not just good but amazing. And Bressois, his former backup, has basically outperformed him, and that wasn't anticipated. Bressois was supposed to be the guy that was maybe a bit of weak link, but no, he was really good in this series at times. Like you said, they weren't both amazing, but Bressois was the one that came out on top. So yeah. He was the better goalie in the end. Before we go on to a couple storylines I kind of want to touch on, which player do you think was the most disappointing for you in this series? We'll talk about what Bowness kind of said, but who do you feel that didn't step up like you thought would?
Yeah, there's a couple guys that come to mind with that, where it's not necessarily one player that I could point out, because especially in that game 5, half the team seemed to disappear, and it was in a game that you needed to win in order to keep your season alive. The urgency wasn't there. But I think they actually ended up on the same line, at the end of the season there, where it's both Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois just didn't seem as invested as they should be in a situation like this, where game 1, you see guys like Dubois and Connor, they were just firing. Dubois was a force. He was one of those guys that you could not get away from him. If you're Vegas, you were just in his tracks all the time. He's jarring pucks loose. He ends up scoring. But it seemed as if as soon as the team went down, he vanished a bit. That attitude that he has, that he would obviously put into these games. Obviously, he would take a lot of penalties with that, but he would also draw a lot. He took a lot of penalties in the series. That was just what he did. But especially in that game 5 there, it felt as if he just didn't have the drive to face the adversity. Um, I mean, it's easy to compare it to, but there was a lot of situations that were not, dissimilar to the shift in Columbus,
Mhm.
where that was kind of what you saw in his last stand there. But guys like, Kyle Connor, he's not a guy that you want to necessarily be in the board battles, but he would actively avoid things that would be able to keep a puck in, things like that, and pass up easier shots in favor of more difficult ones when he waits too long. And it's one of those things where it was very clear at times that Laurent Brossoit was not necessarily totally securing his rebounds and giving up some more. And at that point, just start firing when you can, not trying to find that perfect shot. And I feel like that was one of the more frustrating pieces, was seeing someone like Kyle Connor, who has proven time and time again that he is a great goal scorer, passing up the shots that he should be taking in favor of ones that maybe aren't as high of a probability because he's trying to be perfect.
Mhm. Yeah, and in a series like that, you just, especially when the goalie's got a bunch of rebounds, just get it on net. I
Yeah.
mean, that's, you'll get second chances, but yeah, when you don't, it's kind of tough to win a series when you're not generating so much, right? And your big players not doing it. On the flip side, do you feel there's any positives coming out of this series? I mean, Adam Lowry is one that I kind of point to because he was on fire throughout this series. If everyone was playing like he was, I think the Jets come out of it. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, Lowry and his line were the energy line throughout all of the games, where they were really the only line regularly that I would notice in every single game, because they would be the ones trying to, hem the Knights in. And I think, yeah, definitely you're spot on there, where Lowry's effort level never wavered once.
Mhm.
And a player that I'm actually, and I've been critical in the past of him, but a player that we saw almost a bit of a flashback from was Blake Wheeler. I
Mhm.
found that he had a great series in terms of, he was skating like he used to. He was like he was really just getting where he actually would, have an impact on the game. And we haven't seen that from him in a while, and especially this season. Like after he came back from his below the belt injury from that game against Nashville, where I will spare details from, but he just didn't seem to have that jump in his step. But as soon as the Jets started facing the adversity, he was the one who really I found stepped up, and I thought that that was definitely noticeable for me, uh, because in the past it felt like the other players on the line were doing more, and he was the one who was kind of falling behind. In that 5th game there, it was a lot of the times I found that Wheeler was the one setting the pace, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing per se, but also for a guy who had struggled for a lot of the season, if he's the one setting the pace, perhaps there's another gear that you should also find on that line.
Yeah, for sure. And Blake Wheeler, we all know what happened with his, the captaincy getting stripped at the beginning of the season. And you know, I don't even know if he wore an A throughout the year, right? It's difficult for a guy that, and I think he had a relatively good season for all the drama that was at the beginning, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a good call out. Wheeler did have a really good series. So there's some positives that come out of it, even though there's a lot of disappointments. We're losing in 5 games, and you fight tooth and nail to make the playoffs, and then you don't make it.
Yeah.
You just make it out of it. You don't even win more than 1 game. So, all right. Well, let's move to a couple things that have come out after this series, and this was directly after Rick Bowness. I really angry. Usually you don't see a coach making those types of comments, kind of emotions right on the surface.
Yeah.
What do you think about his comments? Were they warranted right after? Should he have kind of held back and kind of kept that to the room? What do you think about Bowness there?
I think Kyle Connor kind of said it best in his media availability today, where Bonus is an emotional guy who wants to win. And I think that's really what kind of pushed it out a little bit, where, him coming out and for about 5 consecutive minutes just talking about how they didn't have any pushback and how they looked like, the team of, February and March, and Vegas's players were better than their players and that sort of thing. And I feel like the sentiment is correct. I don't disagree with it at all. Frankly, I honestly don't have that much of an issue with him doing it in a post-game conference. He just witnessed this happen. They're out of the playoffs. And frankly, if the thing that I'm curious about though is because he was asked if he had been holding on to these feelings for a while, and he was. And then today, there's a lot of talk about from certain players. I know Wheeler, Dubois, Lowry, they all said that they would have preferred if it was done earlier, and preferred face to face. Talk to the players first before doing that. And then there was also like a sense that was given from the availabilities today, where there was some confusion and that they didn't necessarily know that this was where Bowness was at and his thoughts. And that's a whole other thing where if there's a communication issue there, then that's a whole other problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, true. And the thing is like, yeah, it would have been good if you would have talked to them about that way earlier, of what those feelings were. And comes and bubbles right to the surface, especially right after a series is over. So like you mentioned, Wheeler saying that wasn't how he would have handled it. But Bowness has been in the game for a long time. He knows what kind of, he's been a successful coach, assistant coach, whatever. I know he was in Vancouver here as the associate coach for a number of years. And I don't know him as a head coach, but he's great with the defense and stuff like that. So a lot of respect around the league. So I don't know. It was maybe, I've never seen a coach be that much after a game, especially right after a playoff game. But yeah, I agree. I think it was warranted, especially the effort level that was seen in Game 5, like you mentioned before. It should be a lot higher because you don't win, you're out, and you should be at your best. But never happened.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about this final thing. But I mean, there's so much to talk about. We'll talk about it throughout the offseason. But Connor Hellebuyck's comments really kind of resonate with me when he's saying that he didn't know if he's in the Jets' plans moving forward. What do you think about that? I mean, Hellebuyck's their, arguably, he's probably been their best player for the last 5 seasons.
Yeah.
Kept them in playoff races. Probably been their best player. What do you think about his comments saying that he doesn't even know if he has a future in Winnipeg?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I think it comes from the fact that he's been outspoken that he does not want to do, any sort of teardown. He doesn't want to be a part of that. And I mean, I can't blame him. Even when they're not tearing down, he's still had to put the team on his back a lot. And I can't even imagine the type of, chances he would have to face if the rest of the team is kind of torn down and he's the only one really, backstopping the team to any sort of chance. So I feel like the plans of the team, and I think he said it like totally perfectly himself, where a lot of what he wants to choose from is based on who ends up coming back, who ends up resigning, what the offseason looks like. And I have a feeling that the organization's plans with others are just as important for having Hellebuyck back. That being said, there really doesn't seem to be any sort of indicator as to who will be back next year, which obviously will be a much bigger topic for the off-season preview show. But no, it's Hellebuyck he's a guy who wants to win. That's all he wants. So if the organization is trying to figure out a way how to bring the guys back and go for another run, I think he's all in. I mean, his contract's up after next year, so extension talks, if that's going to happen, would have to, they haven't happened yet, but obviously that would probably be coming in the off season there. But if there is an even slight chance that they decide that they don't want to bring certain guys back and they want to maybe take a run at getting a higher pick, I think that there's a lot of curiosity, especially around the fan base, if maybe he's a guy that you move in the off season to figure out if if the rest of the team is going to be kind of jumbled up and he doesn't want to be here, maybe you can get the return, trade value wise, with a year left on a contract for a guy who's been a top 5 goalie in the league for the past several seasons.
No, I mean, 6.166 is the cap hit, which is not a massive one, especially when you look at some goalies, what they're making. So I mean, it would be for one season, depending on what happens with the Jets throughout the season. If they don't trade him in the offseason, could be a trade deadline thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna be a storyline to watch. One of many.
Yeah.
So to finish off the show, just a quick preview on what do you think? What do you think's next for the Jets? I mean, there's a lot to talk about. So I mean, try to package it into one little thing is probably difficult. But what do you see the most likely thing that's going to happen in the offseason coming up?
Yeah, this is kind of a cop out because I feel like everyone is expecting this, but I think that the thing that everyone's got their eye on is the situation with Pierre-Luc Dubois. It's not a hidden thing where there's been the chatter about Montreal and something there, and he doesn't feel like he wants to re-sign long term here, regardless of what happened with the playoffs this season. So, given the mood in the post, I don't think anything changed on that front. So I think that the biggest thing going into the offseason, because I think it'll also set the tone for the rest of the team, is not if, but I honestly think when Pierre-Luc Dubois is moved, whether it's to Montreal or somewhere else.
Yeah, that's the most likely destination
Yeah.
for Dubois. It's not a secret. That's where he wants to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's either going to be a trade, which would be best interest of the Jets to do that rather than waiting and he'll just sign and just leave. Yeah, I think a trade is definitely likely. All right. Well, thanks, Brian, for coming on the post-series wrap up here. Talked a lot about, stuff that could happen. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch the Jets over the offseason because it's coming up to the draft. They're going to have an okay draft pick of where they were eliminated. So it'll be probably a mid point in the draft. So I will see if they do anything else to get some draft picks. Is that a possibility as well? So
Absolutely.
But yeah, thanks, Brian, for coming on. And we'll talk to you again in our offseason preview coming up as well.
Exactly. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching our first post series wrap up here. We'll have a bunch more. We've got a couple series that ended. We'll have those up shortly. Make sure to check it out, thehockeywriters.com for, of course, Brian and the rest of the Winnipeg Jets writing team. Already's got a bunch of reaction pieces out. So take a look at those. Lots of stuff to unpack because there was a lot that happened in that series. Lots coming up in the off season. So keep an eye on thehockeywriters.com YouTube channel. We're going to have a lot more reaction videos, like I said. And so keep following along, and we'll see you next time on another series wrap up.